do.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the 2023 Sustainable Fleet Technology Webinar Series, Alternative Fuel Total Cost of Ownership Case Studies. Before we begin, I would like to go over some housekeeping details with a reminder that this session is being recorded and that registrants for this course will have access to the recording later this afternoon. For those of you not familiar with Zoom, please note that there is a chat icon at the bottom of your screen. When you click on it, a box will open. If you have a question or would like to make a comment, please type it there. At this point, I would like to turn things over to Rick Sapienza. Speakers, you can turn your cameras and mics on.
Okay. Well, thank you, Annette, and I'd like to thank our panelists for joining us today, as well as our audience. As Annette said, this is Alternative Fuel TCO Case Studies, and the point here, and everybody that's going to talk will re-emphasize it and go into further detail. As we're looking at total cost of ownership or life cycle cost analysis, it takes into account beyond acquisition costs and is a fair assessment to make comparisons, to make decisions on integrating. In my case, the point here is alternative fuel vehicles into your fleets. Be it natural gas, propane, electric, hydrogen, whatever it may be. And again, it'll be emphasized here. We're just showing you some examples. There are folks across the country using alternative fuels every day in their fleets, doing their jobs, performing reliably and efficiently, and saving money. Now that depends upon how you use your vehicle. So when you do these, you do need to be cognizant of not just plugging in generic numbers. Try and use as close to the numbers of your application as possible. So that's my 2 cents and my emphasis there. Do want to have a shout out and recognize our sponsors. If you've been on these before, heard me over the number of years, we are an underfunded agency or organization, and we need to do some things to keep the lights on here and keep doing what we're doing. And these folks helped us with the webinar series. All great companies have some solutions that may work for you. Feel free to reach out to them or go through me. I can put you in touch with some folks to help you out. Upcoming webinars, I have through October, we're going to do charging resilience and off-grid solutions. And then we will do, 4 more. We'll do 2, well, actually, we'll do 3 more. 1 in October, 1 in November, and 1 in December to round out the year. Those will be TBD and TBA, to be determined and to be announced. In fact, I'm dyslexic, TBD. As Annette said, questions go to the chat. We're scheduled for 2 to 3:15. I'm going to try and get all the presentations done within the hour to leave 15 minutes for Q&A. And there is a handout and recording will be made available to everyone that registered. The webinar series, as well as our conference, which we just finished in August, we'll be doing that again in 2024. So announcement coming soon on that one. But the information is all housed at sustainablefleetexpo.com. So we have the presentations from the past conferences, as well as the presentations and recordings from the webinar series going back 3+ years. A lot of good topics. So if you missed something, or maybe you got a topic you're looking for, we probably have done it already. Go look through our library. Our agenda for today, I'm Rick Sapienza. I'll be hosting it and doing our introduction as we speak. Andy Burnham with Argonne National Lab is going to talk about TCO and some of the tools available through the DOE in our national lab. Harlan Chadbourne from WastePro is going to talk about natural gas in a refuse application. Paul Strobus with Broward County Transit is going to talk about some of the factors and what they looked at in their decision, and look a little bit more at their use of propane. And Jessica Stoll with the Electrification Coalition is going to talk about a tool that they have and show an example fleet that they worked with. And that's that. And I got a remnant from last week, so we'll leave that alone. Q&A. Here's my contact information. I'm here as a resource. Feel free to reach out to me. I'll do what I can to help you out. And if I can't, I will get you to the right resource. Here's some tools. There's a lot of tools out there. I figured I'd just throw a few up there. A couple of them we're going to go through today. The Argonne National Lab 1A Fleet, Electrification Coalition, and their Drive One. But NAFA has a resource. They have a life cycle cost analysis spreadsheet, and then an optimum replacement spreadsheet as well. And there's a link for those. Dana and Electrification Coalition. That tool's a little more focused on medium and heavy duty. The California HVIP is a pretty good tool and allows you to put in funding sources if you're able to get some funding to offset that upfront cost of your technology. And then E3 Fleet has been around for quite a while, and it's a straightforward one. You need to know your inputs. I'll say with E3, but I started using the E3 Fleet one probably over 10 years ago. So there's some tools out there. There are others. Poke around, see what you're comfortable with and what you like, and like I said, put in your specific use cases. Here's an eye chart. This is the NAFA life cycle cost analysis samples spreadsheet, and then the other eye chart for folks today is the optimum replacement tool. Our speakers for today went through them real quickly at Argonne National Lab, and Andy Burnham. He's a principal environmental scientist. Andy, his research focuses on energy use, emissions, cost of advanced vehicle technologies and transportation fuels. And Andy's one of the main folks working on advanced fuel life cycle, environment, and economic transportation. That is what A-Fleet stands for, in case you forgot, because I forgot. That tool for DOE Clean Cities. A lot of capabilities of that with emissions and cost, including alternative fuel vehicles. He's also a major contributor to the features on the GREET model, including heavy-duty vehicle module and the vehicle cycle module. Andy was recognized for all the great work that he does with a Distinguished Achievement Award in 2018 by the U.S. Department of Energy Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy for his work on A-Fleet. The other speaker from WastePro is Harlan Chadbourne. He's the Director of Purchasing and has extensive knowledge of strategic sourcing, contracting, and cost reduction strategies. He's dedicated to driving projects that improve efficiency and reduce cost, and has made a significant impact to the sourcing and strategies at all the organizations he's worked with. Harlan's involves across the industry and some of the professional organizations, including NAFA, Florida Coast Institute of Supply Management, and Central Florida Clean Cities Coalition. He's on their board of directors. Paul Strobus, also down in Florida, is the director, the paratransit director for Broward County Transit, which is in Fort Lauderdale. Paul's a seasoned public transportation professional with 20 years experience in providing transportation services for persons with disabilities. He began his paratransit career working for the MBTA, Mass Bay Transit Authority in Boston. He successfully managed BCT's transit program, which is a federally mandated by the Americans with Disabilities Act and by the Florida Commission for Transportation Disadvantage. As the most expensive cost per passenger form of public transportation BCT provides, Paul's implemented innovative ways to control growth and reduce operating costs. One of the major environmentally friendly cost-saving measures implemented include the operation of propane-fueled vehicles to deliver his service. And then Jessica is going to round it out she's a program specialist for the Electrification Coalition and was a Trinity Fellow at Marquette University, which was an intensive 2-year program dedicated to developing urban leaders. While in Milwaukee, she served as the operations and membership coordinator for the Wisconsin Sustainable Business Council, driving sustainability and equity in business operations across the state. Before that, her experience included serving as a AmeriCorps Vista for the city of Indianapolis. There she supported energy policy and electric vehicle adoption projects under the American Cities Climate Challenge. She's passionate about delivering a clean future for people and our planet. So there's our lineup for today. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Andy to talk about vehicle TCO and some of the tools that are available through Argonne National Lab.
Thank you, Rick. I forget what A-Fleet stands for myself, so no problem in forgetting it yourself. Thank you very much for having me. I want to kind of kick off this panel, giving a little bit of background on TCO. Why do we think it's important to use both kind of, we're coming from a research institute, but also as users of fleet managers or people who are interested in vehicle adoption, like why do you want to think about TCO? And I say tools, but I'm mostly going to just focus on A-Fleet, give you a little bit of a background on how you can use A-Fleet to do TCO analysis. Next slide, please. So what is total cost of ownership? Well, it's a discounted cash flow analysis summing up every cost or return, basically, like, are you getting money back? Vehicle sale is the key one there, for the vehicle ownership period across, this entire time. So this graph shows kind of what a discounted cash flow analysis would look like. We have a year one purchase of a vehicle, then you're also using the vehicle, so there's operating cost as well. And then you go through the life of the vehicle or the first ownership life, let's say, and then at some point, maybe the vehicle is sold. So in this chart, year 8, you sell it, and actually you get some money back, basically. And so you have to keep that into account. Another important factor when thinking about kind of cash flow analysis is discounting is, time value of money. Saving money kind of in the future is often, less valuable than, saving money today, right? So that's why you kind of use a net present value typically when you're doing total cost of ownership. You don't have to. You can simplify that, but that's one of the ways like we think about cost of ownership. And when you're kind of saying, okay, what's the output? What is the total cost of ownership? There are different ways of kind of expressing it. Most often you'll say, well, it's the kind of total life cost, like, it's over $100,000 over 15 years. But you can also say like per year, $8,000, or do what we kind of like to do is a levelized cost of driving, kind of coming up with a cost per mile. We find that quite valuable in our comparisons. Next slide. So I'm going to talk like, well, what's included in a cost of ownership analysis. So the national labs, Argonne included, recently analyzed the total cost of ownership of light duty and heavy duty vehicles. And the focus of the study was to try to identify where there were gaps in our understanding of cost of ownership. Most of the time, like on the research side, but also kind of as a users, Rick mentioned this, that you focus on the vehicle price. Like that's the number one thing that like, especially consumers, like how much does the vehicle cost? But then what about all the operating costs? And I think in general, fleet managers know kind of like, okay, fuel price, that's important. And then, maintenance and repair and insurance, those are, important kind of pieces, but like, the questions are like, how do they differ? And where focus was like, well, as you change powertrains, are there differences for these components? As you change vehicle types, are there different costs of that, or different differences in cost of that? We also kind of dug in some, kind of some of the lesser thought about parts of total cost of ownership, financing, vehicle like depreciation. Like, okay, obviously you think about what the cost of the vehicle is, but the depreciation is like a really important factor that you have to think about, especially depending on like the how long you're going to own the vehicle. If the vehicle holds its value for 5 years, like, you're doing great. But we see that especially for alternative fuel vehicles, that as they get introduced kind of in the early stages, their resale market might not be as good. So you see kind of a lower depreciation. One of the findings in our study was that for electric vehicles for light duty, that the depreciation has improved significantly since kind of its original introduction in 2010. Like the gap between like conventional gasoline vehicles and EVs have improved. And then market conditions. So obviously, what we dealt with in the last couple of years, like that kind of threw things all crazy. And so if fuel prices, gasoline prices are really high, the resale value of an electric vehicle or a natural gas vehicle or some other type of vehicle looks better. So something to consider. There are other things like taxes and fees. So depending on which location, which state you're in, there might be additional kind of costs for purchasing a vehicle or operate, the annual operation. And then labor typically is like maybe not included in vehicle TCOs, but it can be important if you're in things like charging. Like if you have to pay for someone to kind of sit while the vehicle's charging or fueling, you need to consider that. So that's especially on the commercial side. So next slide. So that work, we published a report, and I'll highlight kind of some of the findings that what we did. Like we really looked at how do costs change through the lifetime, like doing an analysis specifically of maintenance and repair, trying to find data on how different vehicles maintenance and repair costs change as time goes through. And then of course, like a lot of the things that we do for Department of Energy and Clean Cities is comparing powertrains. So I mentioned that like in the bottom right hand corner is like an analysis of a small SUV and looking at 15 years and then comparing which one kind of on a levelized cost is the cheapest. And then the bottom left is like, well, what is the total cost on a per mile basis for different types of vehicle types? What we learned was that, as probably everyone knows, like not all vehicles are operated in the same way. So kind of piggybacking on Rick's point that like, if you're doing a TCO yourself, like you really need your information to make it valuable. So, VMT, of course, is really important. How long are you going to own the vehicle is really important. The assumptions on kind of fuel prices, insurance, like those are really important. And the challenges are oftentimes like what the cost probably to purchase the vehicle is. That's today. But like as you go into the future, you have to make projections that you're assuming what's the cost in year 10, and you have to have typically some sensitivity or understanding that there is uncertainty in that kind of projection out, and thinking like which of these costs are pretty certain. So you could say like electricity prices don't change that much over a 10-year period, but like gas or diesel prices can swing pretty significantly. And then maybe the last point I'll make on like the study was that thinking about the TCO of a vehicle. So if you hear some study about like, well, today's TCO says this, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to hold true for the future. So we ran, a bunch of scenarios for today, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and things like, say for electric vehicles, battery prices are going to change. The fuel prices I just mentioned, gasoline and diesel, like those may change. And so that's going to change, what the potential cost of ownership will be like when you're looking at a vehicle. Next slide. So that's kind of the research side. kind of bringing it to kind of what can we do with that is like we've rolled that data into the A-Fleet tool. So we recently analyzed that, and then we roll it into A-Fleet, which examines light duty, heavy duty, and off-road petroleum use, greenhouse gas emissions, air pollutant, and cost of ownership. So we do simple payback analysis, which isn't kind of the focus of this, but that's one way of looking at a cost analysis. And then we also do only for on-road vehicles, total cost of ownership. And we, kind of where we come from, the Clean Cities perspective, is we don't focus on just one or two technologies. We try to cover a wide range so that we can cover not just really passenger vehicles or trucks. Like we want to cover from passenger vehicles to work trucks, school buses, transit buses, long haul trucks, and so forth. So we have a wide range of on-road, and basically every on-road vehicle roughly category you could choose basically. And then we have all these 18 different fuels that you can choose. We have default information for purchasing these vehicles, what their fuel economy is, what their fuel prices are, if there's fuel available in your region. But again, using your data is going to improve the analysis. So the defaults kind of help, but try not to use them as a crutch if you are doing an analysis for a specific case. We have a spreadsheet version and then an online version. We update it each year. We just released our new A-Fleet 2023 last month. So next slide, I'll show you our new A-Fleet TCO calculator, online calculator. So we redesigned and kind of created some new online calculators. So we previously had a payback on-road calculator, but now we added a payback off-road calculator, and then the TCO, which is for on-road vehicles. So you can kind of choose kind of where you want to go. The difference of payback and TCO, there isn't like the inputs aren't that much different between doing a payback analysis and TCO. Payback is just kind of a quick way to say like, well, the incremental cost of this vehicle is a little bit, or whatever, let's say $20,000, but my annual operating savings is $1,000. So, how many years does it take for me to pay that back? And that's fine. That can give you like a good starting point. But where TCO might be valuable too is like sometimes, you're going to have a higher TCO for the alternative. You might not be saving money necessarily, but if your goal is environmental savings, you do want to understand that like, okay, well, maybe I only have to pay a little bit extra, but I get this huge environmental savings, and that's important to my business. And, a payback analysis would say, well, you're not paying back. Well, okay, what does that mean? So that's where TCO is another kind of like benefit of trying to understand your cost of like kind of a full understanding of the cost that you would be dealing with. Next slide. So I'm just going to quickly walk through a demo of like, what is the key information that you would want specifically for A-Fleet to enter, and how does our tool work? So kind of on the left-hand side, we have our inputs, the right-hand side, updates as you're kind of changing the information. So we have a wide range of vehicle types. As you see, there's a drop-down, the location, the number of vehicles, vehicle mileage, and then the years of ownership. And then we basically have a table of the powertrain. So you would check like, by default, if I'm choosing a school bus, it says we're going to compare to a diesel, but you might have a gasoline comparison. Here I checked EV, B20, and propane. And each of the kind of cells that you could change if you have better data is fuel economy, purchase price, and maintenance costs. Like the purchase price, that one's definitely like if you have incentives, maybe the EV is not going to be 300K, it's going to be 150K because you got some huge incentive. Same thing for propane, like that's an important factor to include. And there's sometimes like, again, I'll say like the challenges of payback, like sometimes a vehicle is cheaper to buy, like you have incentives. A payback analysis is not going to really tell you anything. It's just going to be like a negative or weird like error payback. Here you're going to see like the total like savings that you're going to have over a period of time. Next slide. Then you enter fuel prices. We provide defaults. that's relatively straightforward, but you can basically, develop scenarios. You don't have to say, oh, the exact price today is this, but I want to look at $4 gasoline or diesel, 10 cents per kilowatt hour electricity. Next slide. Then there are additional costs. So we kind of see, in the top, results bar, we see, the bar says maintenance, fuel, depreciation, insurance, license, financing, and DEF. So basically you can enter your loan terms. You can enter some details on insurance as well as license and registration in this other costs section. And then next slide. In fuel options, this is really only for emissions. So if you have different like feedstocks, this is going to impact like your emissions results. It won't impact your TCO, but most people are kind of looking at typically doing both with A-Fleet. Next slide. And that's kind of the results. And so you can export that into a spreadsheet. You can see the actual details of like what, so you could save this and like, okay, here are my inputs. These are my outputs. The outputs are on the kind of on the web-based thing, but like if you want to save them, you'll have them here to work with. So that's what A-Fleet can provide for you, what kind of information that we have. And then, later, if we have questions, I'm happy to answer them. So next slide. Thank you.
Great, Andy, thank you. Really appreciate it. That A-Fleet tool is a very useful and powerful tool. I've used it before many times, and I recommend anybody out there, take a look at it. It can really help you. So next we have Harland Edborn from Waste Pro. Harland is going to talk about their use of CNG in refuse fleets. Harland, you out there?
I am.
All right, good to see you. All yours.
Okay, thanks, Rick. Hey, welcome everybody, and appreciate Andrew leading us off here today. And I'm going to talk on a similar line of thought concerning diesel fuel versus compressed natural gas fuel. This is a brief agenda, and I'm going to run through it pretty quick. And really, the main question that Waste Pro runs into as a company who's been in business in the Southeast, we have over 2,500 fleet vehicles and over 500 compressed natural gas vehicles, is the buying decision between should we buy more diesel trucks or should we buy more CNG trucks. We also have 8 on-site fueling stations that we use at Waste Pro. So with that being said, you can go to the next slide, Rick. Thank you. Just a couple photographs. This is one of our on-site CNG stations down at Fort Pierce. We have another site. We have Orlando, we have Sanford, Sarasota, Jacksonville, Palm Coast. Rick can cruise on to the next slide or two. This is just a photograph of Palm Coast, where we actually have a public service station. We don't get a lot of traction, but we do have it available to the public. The next slide is Orange Blossom Trail, and it's just a picture of the station being built and kind of the construction process before we finished up. You can see twin compressors. So those folks out there that aren't familiar with compressed natural gas or fueling stations, it's when you build one on site, you're going to need compressing equipment that will push the fuel into the trucks, and that's basically what those two big units there to the right hand, those boxes, and of course a picture of the fueling line being constructed on K-rail on the left hand side. The next photo, we have just a photograph of some of our CNG trucks that we've used at Waste Pro, and we've had a good track record. We've started back in 2012 down in Fort Pierce. That's why I kind of started off the presentation with Fort Pierce. The next slide is just a summary of our stations that we have and the locations, and you can see that we have between 75 and 33 trucks per station. Palm Coast being our smallest one at 25, but a total of 572 fleet vehicles are running off compressed natural gas. The next slide just starts off our discussion on how do we compare CNG fuel versus diesel fuel. And just kind of an intro to it is Rick can move to the next slide. It's just a sample of some different fleet vehicles that run on natural gas. I think over the road, that CNG is really more for hub and spoke, lower, not long hauling type of situations like the beer industry and the soda pop industry and the beverage industry. Refuse is perfect for CNG. Transit, hub and spoke coming back is a great fuel to have. But in terms of long hauling, it's never, in my opinion, been the best solution due to having to stop and fuel and different things of that nature, and also the size of the tanks. The next slide is kind of a quick comparison between the engines, and this came from Cummins, but the one of the main differences is the sound, and they run quieter. We actually, when we first started switching over in the early days of their CNG, we got some complaints that the folks couldn't hear our trucks coming, and they got upset that they missed their garbage stop. But those days have been long gone. We've been in this business a long time now, and also there's a difference in the natural gas exhaust. There's no DEF fluid to maintain. There's no after treatment systems and regenning that's required. So those are some of the basic things that make it different. Of course, natural gas is a much greener fuel than diesel fuel, and with better, lower emission ratios to diesel fuel. On the next slide is CNG fuel, and it just shows a sample of what we've seen in the past. And this slide it says it's $1 difference at the pump versus natural gas. That's 100% correct. We're seeing even a greater delta that I'll go through, but we're also looking at a long-term cost differential between diesel fuel, gasoline, and natural gas. There's over 100, at least predicted, plentiful supply of natural gas in America, between 150 to 250 years. They really don't know exactly, but they know at least 150 years of reliable sources of this fuel. On the next slide, this is what I compared the pricing from 2022 between our stations, the 8 stations that we have, because I manage the fuel and the costing and the maintenance and all the other stuff. And I compared it to bulk and retail diesel. So the two bars at the top are the cost for diesel, and the one at the bottom is and the blue line is the CNG average diesel gallon equivalent cost. And you'll see where they kind of connect back in August, and that was when we had a spike. The fuel prices, basically, the component of natural gas tripled within 30 to 60 days of the unfortunate start of the Ukrainian war conflict. So, but things settled down, and even going into 2023, we've seen lower prices than what you're seeing in this chart, and you're still continuing to see diesel fuel at around $4.63 a gallon today, and our internal costs are still around $2.20 to $1.80. So I'll show you some more about that in a second. Just the next slide talks about diesel fuel, and this is what we paid on average, because we have fuel cards. So we have a lot of fuel cards, about 12 million in spend in that. So we monitor the fuel price at retail. We also monitor our bulk diesel, and you can see if you procure diesel wholesale, this is what Waste Pro sees on an average, about 42 cents, and a cost differential between buying bulk diesel price versus going to the pump and paying at the pump. I use this to compare with what our internal costs, which is on the next slide, our internal costs for compressed natural gas versus retail and bulk diesel fuel. There's at least a $2 difference last year between natural gas and retail diesel, and a $1.65 difference between bulk diesel pricing and CNG diesel gallon equivalent pricing. And on the next slide, because I'm going to move through this pretty quick, and I'll just explain it to you a little bit more as we go. CNG, some of the incentives on CNG, we have a 50-cent a gallon natural gas credit, which helps us with these cost comparisons. I'm sure everybody on the call knows that nobody really gets a discount on diesel fuel, but we do get a discount on natural gas fueling if you fuel it and pump it yourself. So later on in the presentation, I'll show you the difference when we add that 50 cents in. That makes the delta between diesel fuel and natural gas even greater. And the reason I compare these two is that that's our main choices between trucks. Do we want to buy more diesel trucks or do we want to buy more CNG? And as we move into we may eventually look at electrical, but in the Class 8 vehicle category, we know who makes them. We know it's Mack. We know it's BYD, and some others are going in that category. The jury's still out for Waste Pro on electrical, but if we go in that category, we will work to analyze it just like we're doing in this presentation today. On the next slide, a little more information on tax credits for infrastructure credits. So I'm bringing this up to show you that this fuel, even though it's not as popular as Rick said earlier about anything with an EV, it gets popular. But in this fuel category, there are still taxes, and incentives, and monetary benefits to being in this fuel versus other fuels. So in the next slide, again, it just reiterates the tax credit. And it also mentions that Waste Pro as a company through 2022, we've received over $12 million back in tax credits. And those tax credits, out of all the 8 CNG stations that we own, that tax credit is pretty much paid for all the stations. You can look at it different ways. Did that pay for 10, how many garbage trucks that cost $400,000 a piece? So these tax credits have been very important to the company, but they're after the fact. We were going in this business in this direction anyway, but the benefits of these tax credits do weigh into the total cost of ownership of this type of fuel and also the equipment that goes with it. The next slide is RIN credits. These are also available. Just another note on total cost of ownership. We receive RIN tax credits, and it explains a little bit what they are. But in 2022, we got $435,000 back in credit, or actually cash, for pumping our own natural gas fuels. On the next slide, business case for on-site fueling. It's just a quick slide that says, hey, if you fuel either bulk diesel or any type of fuel on site, you're saving your people time. And again, it goes for electrical as well. If you're fueling on site, you're not having to go off site and park somewhere and fuel up. So you can shake and bake this a couple of different ways, but what's it cost an hour to run your truck? Estimated time out of the office. Like this analysis quickly says, 40 minutes of daily time wasted for the driver. How much does that cost? And and run it out 5 years. Run it for the annual. So, a 5-year savings for $30 an hour could be $927,000. If it's $50 an hour, it could be 1.5 mil. And then if you say $85 an hour, it could be 2.6 mil. That's time wasted going off site and fueling. On the next slide, Rick, this is the business case I just kind of covered. Those are the numbers between different hourly rates of running a truck and based on a 43 truck operation. So again, anytime you fuel on site, and we're going to talk a little bit about propane coming up, any type of fueling that's on site, whether it's bulk diesel, electrical, and your drivers don't have to go off site, it saves you time, saves the driver's time, which in a sense saves your company time and money. On the next slide, this is just because I'm getting close to the end here, just shows a historical cost between 2018 and 2022. And you can see the average cost for the past 5 years. So your average diesel gallon cost is $2.42. They give us a tax credit, $1.91. And if you convert that fuel into a gasoline gallon equivalent, which is often done because some people want to compare the CNG to a gasoline price, well, your gasoline average cost was $2.13. And with the tax credit, again, we received that tax credit every year since 2018 through 2022, and we're going to get it through 2024. Your total gasoline gallon equivalent price is $1.66. On the next slide, it just talks a little about what goes into the fuel components that come up with these CNG prices that Harlan's been talking about all day. Well, I just want to make sure everybody understands when I put a number out there, it includes all these components, from the transportation to deliver the gas, to the actual fuel cost, to the maintenance of the equipment, the electricity, the taxes we have to pay, and depreciation on the station. That's what comes under these costs. So when I compare my price to an offsite diesel retail price station, or I compare myself to a compressed natural gas station, I'm comparing equal numbers. On the next slide, this is just some annual volume numbers showing how much that tax credit was worth to us in 2022, 1.8 million. And then key savings on the last slide, or second to last slide, is the annual diesel cost. I mentioned that earlier. Is and how much, if we had to buy all this diesel fuel for CNG, instead of buying CNG gas, it would have cost us $14 million. Or let's put it this way, it'll cost us $4 million more in cash to buy diesel fuel versus buying compressed natural gas fuel. And then I put the other components in there, which I just mentioned. We get a tax credit of 1.8 mil, plus we'll get a RIN credit of 434, basically 2.2 million, coming back to Waste Pro by being in this fuel and using this fuel. Lastly, just some key summary points, as I mentioned, kind of highlighting what I talked about today, which is Waste Pro still benefits from CNG. We've got different credits coming in, and also it's a green fuel that helps reduce carbon emissions in the environment. And it also, as I mentioned a couple of times today, it continues to be less expensive per gallon than diesel fuel, which lowers Waste Pro's annual cost for fuel. So that's kind of it. Comparing diesel to CNG, you can see quite a bit of benefit to us, and we're continuing to buy CNG vehicles along with diesel trucks. That's it.
Great, Harlan, thank you. And I appreciate the breakdown of what's in your cost. That's an important thing to understand. The thing that I don't know if you guys are doing it much. Are you using renewable natural gas at all? And your fleets are it's participating. That's an even greater environmental benefit is the biogas. And the thing when I get questioned, well, it's still a carbon-based fuel, but in transportation, more than 90% of the transportation natural gas on the West Coast is renewable biogas. And then for the rest of the country, we're catching up. We're at around 50% right now, looking at the data that I have.
Right.
It's getting better and better every year. And that's another thing to point out in terms of looking at sustainability. So with that, we're going to go ahead and move on and let Paul take over and talk about what they're doing in Broward County.
Great.
Good afternoon, everybody. Again, I'm Paul Strobus. I'm the Director of Paratransit in Broward County. For those that don't know, it's the Fort Lauderdale area of South Florida. Tell you a little bit about what we do. We're the public transit system here in our community. We've got 1.9 million residents in our community. It's 410 square miles. We specifically provide transportation to our disabled population. And so because of the door-to-door type of service that we provide, this is one of the most expensive services that we provide as a public transit agency. So one of the things that I wanted to discuss today, we're all talking about trying to get to net zero emissions in the United States in the middle of this century. And what I've seen is the investments are really geared towards the EV world right now. But as Harlan just showed, there are existing alternative fuels out there that can benefit your fleet. And so I'm going to talk about propane in lieu of CNG, but I did look at CNG and evaluated the cost of ownership with that type of fuel. I'm not a believer that there's any one solution. Harlan's use of refuge vehicles compared to a public transit environment like mine are two different things. And so depending on what you do, I think there's an alternative fuel fit for each one of us that may be a little different. So, according to the EPA, the transportation network is one of the largest producers of greenhouse fuels. So I was tasked years ago to come up with solutions to meet our green initiatives down here. We get millions of visitors a year to come visit our beaches in Fort Lauderdale. And so we wanted to really move forward in a green environment that we could. So here's some of the factors that I looked at when I was evaluating our source. Next slide. So I wanted to look at what would make it a successful adoption. And so we were looking at ways to reduce our fleet emissions without greatly increasing our cost of delivering the service or losing efficiencies in our service. So we looked at our return on investment and total cost before the end of the life cycle of our vehicles, which are usually 7 years, 300,000 miles. We're looking for similar performance or better than the original fuel without compromising range in our fleet. And we're looking for a domestically produced source of energy to reduce our reliance on foreign oils. Next. So, I looked at electric vehicles, I looked at CNG vehicles, and then I looked at propane. And what I found for me in our environment, propane really fit the type of business model that we have. It is one of the most cost-effective sources to reduce those harmful emissions. I found it to be one of the lowest cost of ownership of any of the alternative fuel, any fuel out there. Forget about alternative fuels. It provided comparable performance without compromising range. Specifically EVs right now in our vehicle style has an average range of between 90 and 120 miles a vehicle, where I can get over 300 miles on a propane vehicle. And so I didn't have to buy more vehicles to do the same work. The other thing we're looking at was flexible fueling infrastructure. CNG looked great to us from a fuel cost, but the station cost was dramatically higher, a couple of $1 million per station. And then we also had to make dramatic changes to our garages to adjust to a CNG environment. So looking at propane, I didn't have to do those changes, and it provided a very flexible infrastructure that could be moved. And I'll talk about that in a few slides, because we contract out our service to private businesses, but the fleet is owned by the county. And so what I also found with propane being domestically produced, in 2019, and this really hasn't changed much in the last couple of years, we average production about 28 billion gallons of propane, and we export almost 2/3 of it. So there's tons of propane out there that we could tap into. And as Rick asked at the end of the last presentation, renewable propane is coming. Most of it is on the West Coast right now, and I'm working very hard to try to get it over here because it's the same chemical compound. I can use renewable propane in the same tanks in vehicles that I'm running now with regular propane. Next. So things that you need to consider moving into alternative fuels. I found you had to going fast. Manage fears and misconceptions. They hear propane and they think it's the same thing we're cooking our burgers and steaks on the grill with. Hollywood shows that everything blows up. So there are a lot of fears and misconceptions that I had to address about the safety of using propane. And the one thing I tell anybody is, look at the vehicle insurance industry. It doesn't cost any more money to insure a propane vehicle versus a gasoline vehicle. And that would be the first place I look at. Second, the number of school buses that are out there that are running on propane now continue to grow, and nobody would ever allow you to put children in a vehicle that wasn't safe. So, knowing the facts of propane will help you. Looking at the vehicle types in your fleet, there are OEM systems available. There are aftermarkets. For almost any type of vehicle you want to operate, you can convert to run on propane. Fueling infrastructure, I'll go over the benefits of propane there. We'll talk about the environment and the budget impact. Next. So fears and misconceptions, as I said, propane being unsafe, it's really not. It has a very narrow range of flammability compared to other petroleum products, higher ignition point than gasoline does. If it leaks, it doesn't raise into the air like CNG, where you have to have equipment up there. It stays at the ground, dissipates. And the equipment in the vehicle are manufactured to rigorous safety standards. I'm going to show you an example. Next slide. 3 weeks before my 138 vehicle fleet was going to go into service with propane, I had a massive vehicle fire. The vehicle was burnt to the ground. It was an engine fire that was electrical in nature, had nothing to do with the fueling system. And when I crawled underneath this bus, there was still 3/4 of a tank of propane in it. All of the safety features that are built in about the minute the engine shuts off, everything bleeds back to the tank, worked perfectly. And so there was never any impact to the propane system with a vehicle that burned this significantly. So it really made me feel good that our fleet was safe, and that the propane, was a safe system to run. Next. So I've got multiple vehicles in my fleet. I've got E450s from Ford that have a Roush Clean Tech direct injection monofuel system in it. I've got Ford Taurus sedans that I bought, that run on gasoline, and I partnered with ICOM North America to convert those to a bi-fuel propane system with liquid injection. They've been on the road. I've got vehicles with 300,000 miles on them running like a tank. And then Ford Transit cutaways, again, we run that with the ICOM bi-fuel system. That gives us extended range if needed, but mostly we run solely on the propane. Next. Talked about the fueling infrastructure. So propane is very portable, and that really worked for me in a contracted environment, because as I award contracts to companies to provide the paratransit services here, we can fuel our vehicles multiple ways. We have mobile fueling options. And if you're considering evaluating a propane vehicle in your fleet, you don't have to just all in and go for a tank. You can partner with a local provider like we do, AmeriGas, and they can provide mobile trucking. I know for a fact that Boston's public schools has a couple hundred propane buses that fuel with a tanker like this every night, because they don't have the landscape to put a fueling station in their bus barn. And so this allows us also, if a vehicle were to run out of fuel out on service, we can go out and fuel it up without having to tow truck it back. We've got that partnership with AmeriGas. We're also able to set up temporary fueling if we need to. So this is something that we can do if for some reason our tanks were down. A bobtail can come in and wet fuel each one of our vehicles so that we're ready to go first thing in the morning. Next. Another solution is a temporary fueling location. We had a new facility being stood up by our vendor. And so we partnered with AmeriGas to have a trailer come in with a single tank so that we could get our fueling done. And when our permanent tanks were installed, this just pulls away and goes on its way. Again, could be used as a temporary solution or in a test environment. So again, I wanted to use this slide to show you too, if I were to move vendors, this is as easy. We just pick this whole thing up and move it to the next vendor's location and plug it in at that location. So very portable. Next. The other thing, now this is an example of the station that we installed at our vendor's building. 2 tanks, 2 dispensers, about 4,000 gallons of capacity. And I didn't pay a dime for this in capital outlay. One of the advantages of propane, you can partner with your fueling entity, and they will provide you the tanks as part of a usage price. And it comes full with the dispensers, the tanks. This includes all the trucking to refill. The maintenance of the tanks and dispensers is part of that agreement. And it's we actually have a fuel system that comes with it, where every vehicle has a fob, and we have a tracking portal that we can go into to see all the fueling that are occurring in our vehicles. And all of this was part of a usage contract with AmeriGas with no capital outlay to buy the stations. Next. So we actually partnered when we put the bid out and AmeriGas won it. We wanted multiple stations so that our fleet could go. We have a hub and spoke at each of the garages that we pull out at, and we have 2 additional stations that make up the 4 that I have in the 4 stars, so that we have fueling in the north and south parts of our county. But the other benefit is AmeriGas has 2 locations themselves at the two green circles that our fleet can also utilize if needed with that same fob system. So we get two additional benefits of station infrastructure by partnering with a local provider like AmeriGas here in our community. Next. So we talked about the benefits of the environment. It's much cleaner than gasoline and diesel vehicles. It continues to get cleaner. And as I mentioned before, renewable is coming. The carbon footprint of renewable propane, there's a study that was done by the Propane Education Research Council comparing the life cycle of fuel. We all know that EVs have no emissions out of the tailpipe, but when you look at the life of the fuel, and that includes, the battery production, processing, all of that stuff, they compare the life cycle. 60 something percent of our country still makes electricity off coal. And so if you look at the total life carbon imprint, propane is one of the cleanest there is. And so we're in discussions with our partner. As I mentioned before, it's the same chemical compound. So once I'm able to get it to the East Coast in quantities that can support my fleet, we intend to go full renewable propane, hopefully in the next 12 months. Next. So this is an emissions calculator that Roush puts out. It illustrated for my county commission and county administration the benefits of what this can do for our environment. And so you put in the calculations for your vehicle, how many miles you're going to do for the life of the vehicle, and it will tell you the reduction in emissions for your vehicle in compared to a gasoline vehicle. So for a single vehicle, 133,000 pounds of CO2. But when you put that across my whole fleet and the life of that fleet, next, we were able to save, millions and millions of pounds of CO2 in those emissions. So it has a dramatic impact on our environment. So, we continue to grow. My entire fleet is now propane. We're moving other parts of our non-revenue fleet to propane just because of the benefits and the cost savings. So next. Similar to what Harlan showed you, I look at the comparison of if I were to buy my vehicles, gasoline versus propane. Here's an example of just this past week. We use the Hatterberg rack price as our payment for AmeriGas. And so last week it was 76 cents per gallon of propane. We allow in our contract that markup for the stations and the ongoing trucking, which our propane cost last week was $1.23 a gallon, compared to the Broward AAA gas average price of $3.63. That's a $2.40 gallon savings for every gallon of propane that we consume and not gasoline. So looking at that difference, how does it impact our operations? Next. This is a breakdown of the fuel that I've purchased over the last 7 years. 2015, when we started running propane, you can see our propane growth was going up through 2019 until COVID hit, where we had a dramatic drop off in ridership and service. So the numbers we expected that number to continue to grow if COVID had not hit, but we're regaining service and that growth is going back up. But a total purchase of 9.2 million gallons, cost me $12 million of taxpayer dollars at an average gallon cost of $1.31. When you compare that to the gasoline equivalent, taking into account the gallon equivalent calculation, I would have purchased less gasoline, 7.8 million gallons, but at a dramatic higher cost. And our 7-year average, according to Gas Buddy, was $2.77. So we saved over $9.6 million here in Broward County using propane in lieu of gasoline vehicles. Additionally, like Harlan mentioned, the alternative fuel tax credit we apply for every year. We've been able to recoup over $3.7 million of that. And to upfit my fleet from a gasoline vehicle to a propane vehicle over the 7 years, I've got 337 vehicles in our fleet, cost me $2.6 million. It's an average of about $8,000 per vehicle to upfit to run on propane. So just the tax credit alone has paid for those savings. And then the fuel savings beyond that are just, honey. So, and again, I remind you, these savings are inclusive of not having to buy stations or retrofit maintenance garages for things like CNG or fueling infrastructure needed for EV vehicles, which are permanent. They're not able to be moved every 5 years like our business cycle generally requires. So that's an example of propane's operation down here in Broward County. And next, if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Paul, thank you. And, point both you and Harlan made, this right now, use every technology and tool you have in terms of driving fleet efficiency and sustainability. And, the technologies all have an application in a place that fits. There isn't a one size fits all. We don't have a single solution.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have Jessica up, and she's going to talk about a little bit more focus on electrification, which I know is on everybody's radar today. So Jessica, I'm going to hand it over to you at this point.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you all for having me today. Like Rick said, I am on the electric side of things with the Electrification Coalition, and excited to talk a little bit more about our total cost of ownership tool, which is called the Dashboard for Rapid Vehicle Electrification, or DRIVE for short. Next slide, please. Just a little bit about what the EC does. We are a national nonpartisan nonprofit that works to expand the widespread adoption of electric vehicles to overcome economic, public health, and national security challenges. We are a fully remote organization with staff across the country, and my primary role is to work with cities and local governments on electrifying their fleets. So that is with the DRIVE tool and then also with federal funding opportunities. Next slide, please. I'm going to go ahead and dive right into the tool. So the DRIVE tool is a total cost of ownership tool that we developed with Atlas Public Policy about 5 years ago. This is an Excel-based fleet analysis tool that evaluates the vehicle replacement options, all based on cost savings. So basically what happens is you can plug in your fleet's vehicle information, run through some steps, and then at the end, you'll be presented with a report that details the best EV replacement options compared to ICE replacement options in your vehicles, in your fleet. It's a great place to start if you're looking at converting your fleet, and is really good if you don't know a ton about maybe EV replacement options that exist or need more data to show the total cost of ownership and potential cost savings across the life of the vehicle. Like I said, we use this a lot with municipal fleets, but anyone can use it. It's a free and open source tool on our website. Next slide, please. So the big draw to the DRIVE tool, again, is that it's free and pretty easy to run. We have a manual that comes with it when you download it, and anyone can use it. So there's no need to outsource a consultant or a private company to get results. It's still just about as robust as other software. You can integrate many variables, including fuel costs, purchase prices, federal and state incentives, infrastructure, and insurance. Next slide, please. A little bit of on the back end of the tool, the data it pulls from comes from the FHWA, the DOE, EPA, and fueleconomy.gov. So it is fairly automated in that sense. We regularly release new versions, with our biggest one coming up here in a couple months, DRIVE 2.0. And then just to note, this is on-road vehicles only and evaluates internal combustion engine replacements against electric vehicle replacements. The tool needs just 3 data points: vehicle identification numbers, annual vehicle miles traveled, and vehicle life expectancy. So pretty easy data to nab from your fleet. And if you don't have some of that, you can use estimations as well. And like I said earlier, lots of variables you can integrate into the tool, leading to a really robust analysis. Next slide, please. I'm going to jump into a case study now. We run a lot of drive analyses with municipalities, so I have just pulled one here from the state of Washington, from a city in the state of Washington that we did recently. Their fleet had 52 vehicles, including light, medium, and heavy-duty vehicles. You can see on the left, a lot of the more prominent vehicles were pickups, Ford Transits, and sedans, and then they also had some more medium and heavy-duty work trucks as well. Some of the specs we used are on the screen, so you can see gas, diesel, and electricity prices. We configured 100% depot charging since they were only going to be charging at their fleet operations building. And then we also built in the commercial clean vehicle tax credit, since for all practical purposes, this is guaranteed funding for local government through direct pay provisions. We added $7,500 per vehicle since each of them were under 14,000 pounds. Next slide, please. So here is just a quick snapshot of the results that the tool brings to life. There's a pretty robust results screen with a lot of different charts and graphs and whatnot, and I've just pulled two here. The figure on the left shows how inputs like insurance, financing, and other aspects are impacting the total overall cost of the vehicles. So you can see a comparison up there of the conventional vehicle replacement to the EV replacement. And you will typically see a savings across the life of the EV, which this graph reflects pretty nicely. All the bars are going down in a downward trend on the EVs. So the key point to this graph is that in their case, they saw a reduced cost per mile across each vehicle use case. And then on the right, you can see another way of representing this savings data. And this one also includes the medium and heavy duty vehicles. The specific results here, again, showed savings across a lot of the light duty vehicles, and then not as much of a savings across the medium and heavy duty vehicles, just because of the model availability there. And then sometimes those have a higher MSRP. And the results here on these graphs are really important and are often used to show decision makers that EVs can be cost effective. In this case, they'd probably recommend transitioning their light duty vehicles and maybe holding off on those medium and heavy duty vehicles at this point. Next slide, please. And here's another really helpful part of the drive report that I'd like to share. This is the vehicle summary page. So this page actually shows the one-for-one comparison of the savings if you were to go with the recommended EV replacement instead of the internal combustion engine replacement. To look a little bit further here, if you all want to look at the pickup truck section, and that first VIN number there is the Chevrolet Colorado. The tool is recommending the ICE replacement to be a Silverado, and then the EV to be the EV Silverado. You'll see very likely to see savings if they were to purchase the EV Silverado over the ICE vehicle, and that savings is projected to be, it looks like, around 47% there. So this page is really helpful. It actually matches every single vehicle with the replacements, and can be used to kind of rank vehicles in that sense. Next slide, please. So there are a lot of uses for the tool, which I've kind of laid out already, but just to kind of recap again, you can learn more about available EV models and replacement options. This fleet in particular was really interested in understanding savings and total cost of ownership from procuring the EVs in place of the conventional gas vehicles. Another way to use this is you can rank vehicles that they should procure now to see the highest savings. They are going to share this report with leadership for buy-in, and then in many cases, this can become the basis of a fleet electrification plan if your fleet is really interested in diving straight into electrification. And next slide, please. And then just a little bit of highlights of how often the tool is used and what it's used for. To date, we've had over 600,000 vehicles assessed. This has been over 1,000 fleets in total. The team has presented the tool to 40 plus presentations and conference sessions, and then we're always adding new features. Just like I said, we've got a new version coming out here in a couple months that will be the biggest overhaul yet. So stay tuned to see what that is. And next slide. That's all I've got. Thank you. And the tool can be found in the link on the screen.
Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and ask all the panelists to come back, and we'll field a few questions from the group. Let's see what we got out there. We may have had. There we go. I guess maybe Harland and Paul, can you talk about the RINs?
Sure. Yeah. Hey,
and really, I think it's the process of how. Yeah. Well, they may be talking about the tax credits because that has a process. The RINs. You go ahead with the RINs, and then maybe we'll mention how you get the tax credits, because it's a matter of filling out the paperwork and getting it. Is both private and public sector are eligible for it. The tax credit.
right. Tax credits is more along the lines of our tax folks handle that, and they pretty much track our fueling and our total spend with our compressed natural gas, and then they fill out the tax forms and go through that process. So that's the actual tax credit per gallon. The other credit I mentioned, which is the RIN credit, it's similar, but I have to do it. I actually take the invoices on a monthly basis for the stations that participate, and I bundle them up and send them to a supplier that I have a contract with that has RIN credits available to transact, and then they use a marketplace to, in a contract, we have a contract for this, to place those credits with somebody that can generate a RIN or money back, essentially a credit back to us, and then it turns into cash eventually as a check back to Wasteboro. So, basically it's bundling the invoices and contracting with somebody that has available programs, and they're, a certified reseller of credits that are approved, by the federal government. Paul, did you have anything to throw in there?
I don't actually get RIN credits here, but I just deal with the alternative tax credit. And as you mentioned, I submit our usage invoices, how much fuel we do every month. We submit it quarterly, and it's usually retroactive. This is the first time I think the alternative fuel's been authorized by the government for years in the future, as you mentioned, through 2024. But essentially, we calculate what we consume, and we get that 50 cents per gallon equivalent, which translates to like 36 cents a gallon actual that we submit, and we get a check back from the federal government for that.
And it looks like there's some interest for TCO for emergency vehicles, electrifying them versus diesel. And I believe both the drive tool and A Fleet can do that for you.
I think so.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's correct from the drive side.
Yeah, we have a little bit of data. I think that, for some of those vehicles, there's been more analysis than others, but yes.
Yeah, and I also recommend, I gave the link to the California HVIP tool. It's likely that they have that in there, to run that use case scenario comparison. There's a number of tools out there. The question is, do they have the data, or do you have the data to do it? Some of the more generic ones, you need to know your inputs. And I guess, Paul, this may be for you. In terms of fleets traveling long distance, I know I can tell an anecdotal story about some trades, electric contractors, etc. If you have a biofuel conversion of your work truck, you still have gasoline and your propane. They loved it, and that they could travel using both and have a very, very long range. Your original range of your truck plus, an added, 300 miles or whatever it happens to be, depending on how many tanks you do.
Yeah, my biofuel vehicles get about 600 miles range between the OEM gas tank and the propane. And the propane system is designed that when the engine starts up, it converts immediately to propane. And then if the propane tank were to run out, it defaults back to the gasoline. So there are stations all over the country. I mean, there are propane stations. You go on the Department of Energy's website. They've got a tool where it'll show you where all the fueling stations are. You can use that to help map long distance trips. We don't go outside our county, so we don't benefit. But I'll tell you, when Hurricane Ian hit Florida last year in the Tampa area, we were tasked with helping evacuations from the East Coast.
Right.
And so the mileage was going to exceed the propane limits on my vehicle. And so we had two options. We could get across Alligator Alley to the West Coast and hit an AmeriGas station over there, top off and keep going, or we could set up a mobile truck, along the highway if we needed to assist us as well. So between that, working with a partner like AmeriGas who has national coverage, or using the Department of Energy's map of where you can fuel up. I know a lot of U-Haul stations across the United States have propane tanks that you can fill up from. So, it could be possible, but it would be a limitation of finding a tank, a fueling location along your travel pattern.
Right.
Much like, what EVs are trying to fix, how we can get mobile stations somewhere along some of our corridors here in Florida.
Right. No, you pointed out that, you have access to, supplier stations. Same thing we see in South Carolina, North Carolina. There are some you probably would be best served by looking at the AFDC tool to map out where your stations may be. And again, you've made the decision to go alternative fuel. You want to maximize your usage, maximize your savings, minimize your emissions. So, I don't encourage, just fill up any gas station anytime you can. But in a pinch, in a biofuel vehicle, you have that option and that luxury, I call it. So I think we've covered what's there. I mean, I'll leave it open. One last chance for a couple of questions. We are at time. I want to respect people's time, and I know we're all busy to not go too much over. We're a couple minutes at this point. I don't see them pouring in. I think that was it. Folks, I really appreciate everybody, helping me out today and presenting some really good information. I appreciate our audience for sticking in there. Gonna go ahead and close it out. Thank you all, and appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, everybody. On behalf of NAP, I want to thank our speakers for an informative and valuable SFT presentation. And thank you all for joining the webinar this afternoon. The recording will be available later on this afternoon. Until then, have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Good day, all.